Sometimes life changes in less than a minute. In my case, it was in the 20 seconds the elevator took to go up from the first floor to my 7th floor apartment. I got in with my heavy grocery bags, thinking about my granddaughter and the Sunday pot roast I was going to make for dinner. Everything was normal, routine, almost boring, until the elevator stopped on the 4th floor and my new neighbor, Lionel Evans, stepped in. He's a quiet man in his 50s with a soft voice who always greets me politely. But that afternoon, he didn't look me in the eye. His breathing was ragged and his hands were trembling. As the elevator doors started to close again, he discreetly slipped me a small note folded into 4 parts. His fingers brushed mine, and I knew something was terribly wrong. I looked up to ask him what was going on, but he just moved his lips and whispered, "Don't say anything." I opened the note without thinking. It said, "Fake sick and get out of here fast." I froze. My first impulse was to laugh, to believe it was some absurd joke, but then I saw his face, pale, tense, like someone who knows danger is too close. My heart started pounding hard. I didn't understand anything, but something inside me screamed to trust him. I clutched my chest and pretended to be dizzy. "Oh, dear God," I mumbled, swaying and stumbling. "I don't feel well." Lionel pressed the emergency button. The elevator stopped between floors, and with an effort, he managed to pry the door partially open. "Get out, Miss Sterling," he whispered firmly. "Now!" And that's what I did. I scrambled out trembling, my grocery bags tumbling to the floor. I leaned against the hallway wall as he stayed inside, holding the door. When our eyes met one last time, I knew this wasn't a game. There was genuine fear in his eyes. Before I continue, I want to make a special invitation. Please subscribe to the channel and leave a like. This helps me see that you support and enjoy my stories. And comment below, telling me what city you're watching from right now. Let's continue. Minutes later, sirens began to fill the street. The noise was coming from the parking garage, and the echo climbed the condo tower's walls. From my window, I saw police cruisers and an ambulance arrive. Neighbors started spilling out of their apartments, alarmed. Someone yelled that the elevator was stuck between floors. Someone else said there was blood. I didn't understand any of it. I wanted to go down, but my legs wouldn't move. I sat down in the hallway, trying to process what had happened. Lionel, the note, the fear on his face. What had he been trying to prevent? What did he know that I didn't? An officer knocked on my door a few minutes later. "Are you Ms. Alara Sterling?" he asked urgently. "Yes, officer. What's going on? Did you know the man who was in the elevator with you?" My heart stopped. What happened to him? He was found deceased when the paramedics arrived. I felt an emptiness in my stomach. Deceased? But I just spoke to him. The officer lowered his gaze. "It appears someone attacked him." I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his look. I thought about that note and how if I hadn't listened to him, I would have been the one left there. I turned on the lamp and opened the note again and again, as if the letters would change. The paper was stained with sweat. On the back, something was written in faint blue ink. "Don't trust anyone in the building." A shiver ran down my spine. How was that possible? I've lived here for over 30 years. I know everyone. Doris from the 5th floor, who's always asking me for sugar, the Peterson twins, who spend all day arguing, and my daughter-in-law Kendra, who lives on the 8th floor with my son. I froze. My daughter-in-law, the same one I'd argued with just a week ago about an old family inheritance. The next morning, the police returned to question me. They wanted to know why Lionel had given me that note. I didn't know what to say. Maybe he was confused. Maybe he thought I was someone else. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. He knew exactly who I was. When the officer left, I was alone in the living room. The elevator was still out of order, and the silence of the condo building was unbearable. I made a decision. I wasn't going to sit around waiting for answers. Lionel had tried to save me for a reason, And if that reason had something to do with someone inside these walls, then I wouldn't rest until I found out why someone wanted me dead in that elevator. The following days were a mixture of silence and whispers. The entire building seemed to breathe differently, as if the walls held the echo of that crime. Doors closed faster, curtains were drawn subtly, and the elevators, once a gathering point for neighbors, had now become a cursed place. Every time I went up or down the stairs, I felt eyes fixed on my back. Some greeted me with fake kindness, others simply looked away. It was as if everyone knew something, except me. The police had visited several times. They wanted to know what had happened between Lionel and me. I told them what I remembered: his look, the note, the fear. The lead detective, a man with a tired face, listened intently. "And you say you didn't know him?" he asked as soon as he greeted me in the hallway. "Interesting," he murmured, reviewing his notebook. "Because we found your name written on a sheet of paper inside his apartment." "My name?" I asked, surprised. "Are you sure?" "Elara Sterling, 7th floor. He wrote it next to 2 other names, but the others were crossed out." I didn't know how to respond. The detective watched me for a few more seconds and added, "Do you know if he had any enemies?" "No," I replied, "but it looks like I do." It was hard for me to sleep that night. The clock marked 2 in the morning when I heard footsteps in the hallway. I got up silently and put my ear to the door. Someone was out there breathing. I felt a knot in my throat. Suddenly something fell. A small white envelope slid under the door. I waited a few seconds before picking it up. It had no return address. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a folded sheet of paper and a newspaper clipping. The clipping spoke of the assassination of a businessman involved in a financial scandal. On the sheet of paper, in hurried handwriting, someone had written, "It all started with your husband's inheritance. Don't trust anyone." I let the paper fall. My husband, Marcus Sterling, had died 6 years ago. The inheritance had been a source of arguments with my son and his wife, Kendra. She had insisted on selling the family land, but I had refused. That dispute broke the little relationship we had. What does Marcus have to do with this? I asked myself softly. The next morning, I went down to the building lobby. The neighbors were gathered there like crows over a secret. Doris from the 5th floor looked at me curiously. "Elara, did you hear the news? The man who died in the elevator was an accountant. They say he worked for a woman on the 8th floor." A shiver went down my spine. "The 8th floor?" "Yes, Kendra Reed. Isn't that your daughter-in-law?" I didn't answer. I just nodded, trying not to let the trembling in my hands show. I returned to my apartment with my mind spinning. Lionel, the note, the murder, the accountant. Everything was starting to connect, but I still didn't understand how. That afternoon, I decided to go to my son's apartment. Darius greeted me with a tired smile. "Mom, what a surprise. Come in, please." The house was spotless, as always. Kendra, his wife, appeared a few seconds later, dressed in a silk robe, smiling coldly. "Nice to see you, mother-in-law. To what do we owe the honor?" "I just wanted to know if you heard anything about the elevator incident," I replied, carefully choosing my words. "Terrible," she said, feigning horror. "Yes, that man was my accountant." I froze. "Your accountant?" "Yes, he handled a few things for me, minor stuff, nothing important." She said this while avoiding eye contact. Darius intervened. "Mom, don't start, please." "I'm not starting anything, son. I'm just asking." "Honestly, there's nothing strange about it," Kendra added, smiling. "That man had enemies. I'm not surprised he ended up like that." I left quickly, my heart pounding. I didn't know if it was my imagination, but there was something in her tone, an unsettling certainty, as if she knew more than she was letting on. That night, I went through my husband's old documents. In one of the folders, I found a sheet of paper with a name underlined, Lionel Evans, the same man who had given me the note, and in the margin, in my husband's handwriting, was written, "Tell if something happens to me." My blood ran cold. Lionel knew Marcus. He was looking out for me on my own husband's orders. And Kendra, What part did she play in all this? At midnight, I decided to step out into the hallway. I couldn't sleep. When I reached the elevator, I saw something that chilled me to the bone. The door was open, still showing the dry marks from the day of the crime. On the floor, a small smudge of blue ink, the same ink from the note Lionel had given me. I looked up toward the 8th floor, and for an instant, I could have sworn I saw the shadow of a woman watching me from the hallway above. A tall, still shadow wearing a silk robe identical to Kendra's. I retreated slowly, locked my apartment door, and secured the deadbolt. I sat in the darkness, unable to stop thinking. The note, the clipping, my husband's name, the connection with Lionel. Everything pointed to a truth that was just beginning to emerge. And even though fear paralyzed me, something else grew inside. A suspicion that hurt more than the terror. Because if Lionel had been my protector, then the threat had to come from someone I loved. 3 days passed since the last time I slept well. Since I learned that Lionel Evans' name was written in my late husband's papers, I couldn't get his face out of my mind. That desperate look, that note written in blue ink, that warning that saved my life. It was no longer a coincidence. It was a message that came from the past, a past someone was trying to erase. The entire building seemed to look at me differently. In the elevator, now repaired, no one said a word. Everyone lowered their eyes, pretending they knew nothing. But I watched them. Doris, who spent more time peering through her peephole every day, the Peterson twins, who had suddenly become friendly, almost subservient, and especially Kendra, who feigned cordiality every time I crossed her path, but couldn't hide that nervous glint in her eyes. She knew something. I could feel it. I decided to go to the building maintenance room where the security cameras were kept. I knew the superintendent, Ethan, a quiet, helpful young man in his 20s. When I asked him to show me the recordings from the day of the murder, he hesitated. "I don't know if I should do that, Ms. Sterling." "Look, son," I said in a low voice, "that man saved my life. I just need to understand why." Ethan nodded, closed the door, turned on the screen, and began to play the images. The video showed the 4th floor hallway. Lionel entering the elevator, then me, and then nothing. The recording stopped just before he handed me the note. "See?" Ethan said. "There's a 5-minute cut." And who can access those recordings? Only the building manager, and, well, some owners if they request authorization. Owners like who, for example? Ms. Kendra Reed. My heart skipped a beat. My daughter-in-law? Yes, she requested access 2 weeks ago to check on a supposed theft in her apartment. I didn't say anything. Ethan kept searching through the files and found something else. "Look at this," he said, zooming in on the image. In the 8th floor hallway, barely 1 hour before the crime, Kendra could be seen entering the building with a large black tote bag. 10 minutes later, she was running out. "Could you make me a copy of this?" I asked him. "Of course, but please be careful, ma'am. Not everyone in this building is who they seem." That afternoon, I returned home with the USB stick in my pocket. I looked at it as if it were a ticking bomb, proof that something terrible had been right in front of me without my seeing it. I turned on the computer and reviewed the recording again and again. There was Kendra, her hurried walk, her face hidden behind dark sunglasses, the bag pressed against her body, and something else. As she left the building, she looked up toward my window. Fear mixed with anger. If Lionel was connected to my husband, and Kendra had been in the building that day, then it hadn't been a random murder. It had been a failed warning, and I had been the original target. I decided to keep the evidence in a sealed envelope, along with the note Lionel had given me. I hid them in the false bottom of a drawer. But that night, someone broke into my apartment. The noise woke me up around 2 in the morning. It was a faint sound, almost imperceptible. The creak of the floorboards in the living room. I got up without turning on the light, barefoot, my heart pounding 1,000 beats a minute. From the darkness, I saw a shadow move near the desk. I couldn't distinguish who it was, but I saw the slender, feminine silhouette, and in their hand, Something metallic glistened. A key. I hid behind the door and waited. The shadow opened the drawer, fumbled clumsily, and then hurried out. When I dared to look, the envelope was gone. I went out into the hallway, but no one was there. Only the scent of expensive perfume, the same one Kendra had worn since she married my son. The next morning, I called her. "Kendra, I need to talk to you," I said calmly. "I'm busy right now." "It will be quick. It's about Lionel." There was a silence on the other end of the phone. "What does that man have to do with me?" she asked, her voice tense. "You tell me." She hung up. That night, fear turned into determination. If someone had stolen the evidence, it meant I was right. It meant someone was afraid of what I knew. And that person didn't just want to cover their tracks. They wanted to silence me. I called Ethan again. "I need you to copy the entire system, all the recordings from the last 3 weeks," I asked him. "What's going on, ma'am?" "The same thing that happens when the truth starts to come to light. Fear changes owners." A few hours later, I received an anonymous text message on my cell phone. "Don't look anymore. Your curiosity will kill you, just like Lionel." The number was unknown. I looked at the screen, my hands trembling. I felt a cold current run through my body. I deleted the message and turned off my phone. I stared out the window toward the 8th floor, where the light in Kendra's apartment was still on. Behind that window, I knew someone was watching me too. Someone who was no longer afraid to get their hands dirty. And that night, I made up my mind. If they wanted to silence me, they were going to have to hear me scream first. The truth doesn't arrive all at once. It filters in slowly, like water through a crack, until it finally soaks everything. And when it's too late to stop it, you realize that what you thought was your life was actually a stage where others pulled the strings. After the anonymous message, I knew I couldn't trust anyone. Kendra didn't answer my calls. Darius, my son, still didn't suspect a thing, and Lionel was still dead. But in every corner of this house, something told me that his story wasn't over yet. That morning, I went to my husband's study. I hadn't gone in there since his death. The air smelled of old paper and wood. On his desk, covered with a layer of dust, were folders in his unmistakable handwriting. I opened them one by one until I found a sealed envelope with my name on it. "Elara, if something happens to me, find Lionel Evans. He's the only one I trust." A shiver went through me. Everything was connected. Marcus had known him, maybe even worked with him, but on what? Among the documents, I found a thicker folder marked with a name I was beginning to hate. Kendra Reed. Inside were copies of contracts, transfers, and photographs. And there, finally, the truth began to take shape. My husband had discovered before he died that Kendra and her family had used shell companies to siphon money from the family assets. Lionel, who was then working as an auditor, had been his secret collaborator. When Marcus became ill, he wanted to report everything, but he didn't get the chance. He died in a car crash, an accident I was now starting to doubt. Rage coursed through my body like fire. For years, I had believed my husband's death was a cruel twist of fate, but now I understood that someone had pushed him toward that fate. Kendra, the woman who married my son for convenience, the one who smiled while robbing me,